In 2008, fishermen off the coast of Newfoundland pulled something from the deep that stopped them cold. A lobster, 20 pounds, claws the size of a grown man's forearm. When they delivered it to a restaurant on Park Avenue in New York City, a marine biologist looked at it and estimated its birth year, 1869. This animal was alive before the light bulb was invented, before the Titanic sank, before both world wars, the moon landing, and the internet. 140 years spent crawling across the Atlantic seafloor in absolute darkness, growing larger, growing stronger, and showing no signs of slowing down. They named him George. He lived in the restaurant tank for 10 days before a customer called PETA, who pressured the owner to release him. George was driven to Maine and dropped back into the ocean, where he presumably still is, doing what he's done for over a century: eating, fighting, growing. Most people think of lobsters as food, a luxury item on a white tablecloth. But here's what I didn't know until I started digging into what a lobster actually is. It's not just an animal, it's a biological contradiction. A creature that bleeds blue, urinates from its face, chews food with its stomach, carries its skeleton on the outside of its body, and may be the closest thing on Earth to something that doesn't age. Nothing about lobsters is normal, and the deeper you look, the stranger they get. Let's start with the blood, because that's where everything about lobsters begins to feel wrong. Human blood is red because of hemoglobin, an iron-based protein that binds oxygen and carries it through our bodies. Lobsters don't use iron, they use copper. Their oxygen-carrying protein is called hemocyanin, and when it binds with oxygen, it turns blue. Not metaphorically, their blood is literally chemically blue. But here's what makes it stranger. Inside the lobster's body, when oxygen levels are low, the blood is completely colorless, transparent, invisible. It only turns blue when exposed to oxygen, like some kind of chemical reveal. And unlike hemoglobin, which sits neatly packed inside red blood cells, hemocyanin floats freely in the hemolymph, the lobster's version of blood, bathing every organ and tissue directly. No blood cells, no containment, just a copper-rich fluid running through an open circulatory system. It sounds primitive, but in cold, low-oxygen environments like the deep Atlantic, hemocyanin is actually more efficient at transporting oxygen than hemoglobin would be. Evolution didn't give lobsters inferior blood. It gave them blood optimized for a world we can't survive in. Now, let's talk about their body, because nothing is where you'd expect it to be. Lobsters have their teeth in their stomach, not in their mouth, in their stomach. A structure called the gastric mill sits inside the digestive tract, grinding food with 3 calcified plates that work like biological millstones. They crush shells, bones, and anything else the lobster has torn apart with its claws. And here's the part that still surprises me. When a lobster molts, it doesn't just shed the outer shell. It sheds the lining of its entire digestive tract, including those stomach teeth, every single time. The whole system, rebuilt from scratch. Their brain is in their throat. Not technically a brain at all, actually. Lobsters don't have a centralized brain the way vertebrates do. Instead, they have a ring of nerve tissue called ganglia that wraps around the esophagus, with a chain of nerve clusters running the length of the body along the underside. It's a distributed nervous system, closer to a network than a command center. Primitive by mammalian standards, but it's been working for 480 million years. So maybe the definition of primitive needs revisiting. And then there's the urine. Lobsters urinate from nozzles located at the base of their antennae, from their faces. And this isn't just waste disposal, it's communication. But before we get to what they do with urine, look at their claws. Because their claws are a design story all on their own. Adult lobsters develop 2 distinctly asymmetrical claws. The crusher claw is the larger of the 2, heavy, blunt, lined with molar-like teeth, built to crack open clamshells, mussel shells, sea urchins, anything with armor. The other is the ripper claw, also called the pincer or Caesar, thinner and sharper, designed for tearing flesh and grabbing fast-moving prey. Here's what surprised me. Lobsters aren't born with this specialization. It develops based on use. Whichever claw gets more stimulation during the juvenile stage becomes the crusher, the other becomes the ripper. And if a lobster loses a claw in a fight or to a predator, it can regenerate it entirely over the course of several molts. The replacement claw won't be as large at first, but given time, it will grow back to full size. This regenerative ability extends to legs and antennae as well. A lobster can lose limbs and rebuild them. Not many animals on Earth can do that. When lobsters encounter each other, they spray jets of urine directly at each other's faces. These streams carry pheromones, chemical signatures that broadcast identity, dominant status, and reproductive readiness. Females signal their willingness to mate through urine. Males assert their rank. Conflicts are often decided not by claws, but by chemistry, a language of scent written in piss and delivered point blank. Now, let's talk about the thing everyone has heard, the immortality claim. The internet loves this idea. Lobsters don't age. Lobsters live forever. Lobsters are biologically immortal. And like most things the internet loves, it's not exactly true, but it's not exactly wrong either. And the real story is far more interesting than the meme. Most animals age through a process called senescence. As cells divide, the protective caps on the ends of chromosomes, called telomeres, get shorter. Each division costs a tiny piece of genetic protection. Eventually, the telomeres erode so far that cells can no longer divide properly. DNA gets damaged, tissues degrade, organs fail. This is aging. This is why humans wrinkle, weaken, and die. Lobsters do something different. They produce an enzyme called telomerase throughout their entire adult bodies. Most animals, including humans, only express telomerase in embryonic tissues, stem cells, and cancer cells. But lobsters express it everywhere, in their muscles, their organs, their nervous tissue. The enzyme continuously rebuilds telomeres, resetting the clock on cell division. Their cells don't accumulate the damage that ours do. They don't weaken with age. They don't lose fertility. An old lobster isn't a frail lobster. An old lobster is a bigger, stronger, more fertile lobster. This is what scientists call negligible senescence. The rate of biological deterioration doesn't increase with age. A 10-year-old lobster and a 100-year-old lobster are, at the cellular level, functionally the same age. And for a long time, that made aging lobsters almost impossible. They molt their shells, so there are no growth rings to count on the exterior. Scientists tried estimating age by weight, by size, by fat deposits on the eye stalks. None were reliable. Then researchers discovered something remarkable. Lobsters have growth rings on calcified structures inside their eye stalks, and in their gastric mills, their stomach teeth, similar to the rings inside a tree trunk. 1 ring per year. A biological clock hidden in the one place the molt doesn't reach. This discovery, confirmed in the last decade, finally gave scientists a tool for precise aging. And the numbers it revealed were staggering. European lobster females averaging 54 years old, some exceeding 72. American lobsters reaching well beyond 100. So why don't they live forever? Because the very thing that makes them extraordinary is also what kills them: growth. Lobsters never stop growing. And because they wear their skeletons on the outside, the only way to grow is to destroy the old body and build a new one. This process is called molting, and it is one of the most violent acts of self-renewal in the animal kingdom. Here's what happens. Hormones trigger the process. A new soft shell forms underneath the old one. Calcium is pulled from the existing exoskeleton and stored in structures called gastroliths near the stomach. The lobster absorbs excess water, swelling its body, increasing internal pressure until the old shell cracks along the seam between the carapace and the tail. Then the lobster backs out of its own skeleton. It pulls its entire body through the gap, including its legs, its claws, its antennae. It rips out the lining of its throat, its stomach, and its anus. The whole digestive system comes with it. The extraction takes about 10 minutes, but the recovery takes weeks. The lobster immediately begins absorbing seawater, swelling its body by about 10%, to stretch the new shell to a larger size before it begins to harden. And here's a detail that still stops me. After pulling itself free, the lobster turns around and eats its own discarded shell. It consumes the old exoskeleton to reabsorb the calcium and minerals stored in it, accelerating the hardening of the new one. It literally recycles itself. During that soft shell phase, the lobster is essentially defenseless. Its new shell is paper thin. Its body is soft and swollen. It can't fight. It can barely move. Predators know this, and many lobsters, especially older ones, die during or just after molting. Young lobsters molt constantly, up to 25 times in their first 5 to 7 years, each molt increasing body size by roughly 20%. But as they age, molting slows. Once a year for adult males, once every 2 years for females. And at extreme sizes, the energy required to shed and regrow an entire exoskeleton becomes unsustainable. The lobster grows so large that the act of renewal becomes the act of death. Exhaustion during a molt, infections entering through the soft new shell, shell disease eating through the carapace before the next molt can repair it. The very process that kept them alive for a century eventually overwhelms them. They don't die of old age. They die because they can't stop growing. The largest lobster ever officially recorded was caught off Nova Scotia in 1977. It weighed 44 pounds and 6 ounces and measured 3.5 feet from claw tip to tail. The Guinness Book of World Records still lists it as the heaviest marine crustacean ever documented. To put that in perspective, most lobsters you see at a restaurant weigh between 1 and 4 pounds. This animal was more than 10 times that. There are rumors of even larger specimens. A 51-pound lobster supposedly caught in Maine in 1926. But the evidence is thin, and the carcass was reportedly destroyed in transit. What we do know is that the American lobster, Homarus americanus, is the largest arthropod on Earth by weight. And every one of those record breakers survived decades of molts, decades of vulnerability, decades of rebuilding itself from the inside out. Between 10 and 15% of lobsters die during or shortly after molting. For the very old and very large, that number climbs higher. Some get stuck, some simply don't have the energy reserves left, and some survive the molt itself, only to succumb to infections that enter through the soft new shell before it fully hardens. It's a brutal irony. The mechanism that lets them grow forever is the same mechanism that kills them. But before death, there is war. But first, let's talk about what lobsters eat, because even their diet is extreme. Lobsters are nocturnal hunters and opportunistic omnivores. They eat crabs, mussels, clams, sea urchins, starfish, worms, fish, and sometimes other lobsters. They crush hard-shelled prey with their crusher claws, tear soft prey with their rippers, and grind everything into paste with their stomach teeth. They've been known to roam up to 10 kilometers from their burrows in search of food. And in lean times, cannibalism is not uncommon. Larger lobsters will eat smaller ones without hesitation. In the lobster world, if you're small enough to be prey, you are prey. And where there is food, there is competition. And lobsters are fighters. Not in some abstract territorial sense. In the most direct, physical, violent sense possible. They form strict dominance hierarchies through combat, and these hierarchies govern everything. Who eats first? Who gets the best shelter? Who gets to mate? When two lobsters meet, they size each other up. They spray urine. They extend their claws. If neither backs down, the fight begins. Claws lock. Bodies are lifted off the ground. Antenna whip. The crusher claw, the larger of the two asymmetrical claws, is built to break shells. In a fight, it can snap off an opponent's leg, crack its carapace, or sever an antenna. The other claw, the ripper, has sharper teeth for tearing. These aren't brief scuffles. Lobster fights can last for minutes, even longer, escalating in stages from posturing to grappling to full contact combat. And the results are decisive. The loser retreats. Its body language changes. Its posture drops. It avoids the winner for days or weeks afterward. Here's where it gets neurologically interesting. The outcome of these fights changes the lobster's brain chemistry. Winning a fight floods the lobster system with serotonin, which in crustaceans promotes aggressive, dominant behavior. The winner stands taller, approaches others with confidence, and is more likely to win future encounters. Losing does the opposite. Serotonin pathways reconfigure. The subordinate lobster becomes more cautious, more withdrawn, less likely to challenge. Its body physically reflects its defeat, hunched, low, retreating. Scientists have injected serotonin into subordinate lobsters and watched them immediately resume fighting, standing taller, lasting longer, behaving like dominants. The hierarchy isn't just social, it's chemical. It's wired into the nervous system. And it can be altered, pharmacologically, with a single injection. Prozac, the human antidepressant that works by increasing serotonin availability, has been shown to affect serotonin uptake in lobster nerve terminals. The same molecule, the same mechanism, separated by over 500 million years of evolution. And then there's mating, which in lobsters is a ritual that involves violence, vulnerability, and remarkable trust. Female lobsters can only mate after they molt, when their shells are still soft. Before this moment, a female selects a dominant male's den. She approaches and releases urine loaded with pheromones into the entrance, signaling her readiness. Over the course of days, she courts him. She enters his shelter, and then she does something extraordinary. She removes her shell in his presence. She stands before the most powerful lobster in the area, completely unprotected, soft-bodied, defenseless. And instead of killing her, which he could do easily, the male protects her. He guards her while she's vulnerable, mates with her, and then lets her leave once her new shell begins to harden. The female stores the sperm internally, sometimes for over a year, fertilizing her eggs when conditions are right. She then carries thousands of fertilized eggs on the underside of her tail, called the pleopods, for 9 to 12 months before they hatch. The larvae that emerge are tiny, translucent, and drift in open water for weeks before settling to the ocean floor. Of the thousands that hatch, only a handful will survive to adulthood. Lobsters have been on this planet for roughly 480 million years. They predate dinosaurs by over 200 million years. They predate flowers, mammals, birds, and trees. They survived every mass extinction event in Earth's history: the Ordovician, the Devonian, the Permian, the end Cretaceous asteroid that killed the dinosaurs. They crawled through all of it. And for most of that history, they were nothing special on the human table. In colonial New England, lobsters were so abundant they washed up on beaches in piles 2 feet high. They were considered poverty food, prison food. Servants in Massachusetts literally had clauses in their contracts stipulating they wouldn't be fed lobster more than 3 times a week. The animals were ground up and used as fertilizer, as fish bait, as feed for livestock. It wasn't until the mid-1800s, when railroads made it possible to ship live lobsters inland, that the perception shifted. Scarcity created value, distance created mystique, and the creature that once fed indentured servants became a $500 million a year industry. Today, the American lobster fishery is the economic backbone of coastal communities from Maine to Nova Scotia. Maine alone generated over $500 million in lobster revenue in recent years. Nova Scotia exports roughly $2.9 billion worth annually. There are an estimated 250 million American lobsters in the Gulf of Maine alone. Fishing regulations now protect breeding-age females and mandate that oversized lobsters be returned to the ocean, ensuring that the largest, most fertile animals remain in the gene pool. And yet, the threat they face now is unlike anything in their evolutionary history. Rising ocean temperatures are reshaping their habitat. In the Gulf of Maine, water temperatures have risen faster than nearly anywhere else on the planet. Lobster populations have shifted northward, chasing colder water. Shell disease, a bacterial infection that eats through the exoskeleton, has surged in warmer waters. And ocean acidification, driven by increased atmospheric carbon dioxide, threatens the very chemistry lobsters depend on to build their shells. Less calcium carbonate in the water means thinner shells, harder molts, and weaker protection. The American lobster fishery generates hundreds of millions of dollars a year. It is the economic backbone of coastal communities from Maine to Nova Scotia. But sustainability depends on a population that can keep reproducing faster than we can harvest. And as the ocean changes, the margins get thinner. Here's what stays with me. The lobster is an animal that bleeds blue and pees from its face. It has teeth in its stomach and a brain wrapped around its throat. It communicates through urine, fights like a gladiator, and has its social status chemically encoded into its nervous system by the same molecule that regulates mood in humans. It grows without limit, tears itself apart to keep growing, and may hold the closest thing biology has ever produced to a cure for aging, an enzyme that endlessly repairs the erosion of time. And then it dies, because it got too big, because the thing that made it extraordinary, the refusal to stop growing, eventually becomes the thing that destroys it. There's something in that, something that extends beyond lobsters. We've known about these creatures for centuries. We've eaten billions of them, and we still don't fully understand how they work. How do they navigate the ocean floor across hundreds of miles? What triggers the precise hormonal cascade that initiates a molt? Why does telomerase behave so differently in their tissue than in ours? And what would happen if we could replicate it? The answers are crawling across the bottom of the Atlantic right now, in the dark, in the cold, growing larger, growing older, and waiting for something we haven't figured out yet.